The dust tasted of alkali and despair. It coated Alara's tongue, clung to her tattered dress, and settled in the lines etched by hardship around her eyes. The noon sun beat down on the railside saloon and the few rough-hewn buildings that comprised this forgotten speck on the vast, unforgiving plains. Inside the saloon, the air was thick with the smell of stale beer, sweat, and the faint metallic tang of dried blood. Men, mostly ranch hands weathered by wind and sun, clustered around tables, their laughter punctuated by the clink of glasses and the occasional curse. Alara stood just inside the doorway, a ghost amongst the living. Hunger gnawed at her, a relentless, aching void that had been her sole companion for days. She had walked until her feet bled, until hope had been scoured from her soul like topsoil in a flash flood. Her gaze fell upon a man seated alone at a small table, apart from the others. He was big, solid, with hands like shovels and eyes that seemed to hold the vast, empty distance of the land outside. A plate with half-eaten steak and potatoes sat before him. Swallowing her pride, a bitter, unfamiliar taste, Alara gathered what little strength remained. Every eye in the room seemed to turn towards her as she moved, a collective gaze of suspicion and contempt. This was no place for a woman alone, and her appearance spoke of utter destitution. Shame burned hotter than the sun on her skin, but the gnawing hunger was a more potent master. She stopped before the man, her voice barely a whisper, raw from thirst and disuse. "May I have your leftovers, sir?" The noise in the room died down. A few snickers rippled through the silence, quickly suppressed. The man, a rancher known only as Silas, they said, looked up. His eyes, the color of storm clouds, met hers. There was no pity in them, not the easy, dismissive pity she might have expected. Instead, there was an unsettling depth, a stillness that seemed to probe beyond the surface. He didn't speak for a long moment, the silence amplifying her humiliation. She saw her reflection in the condensation on a nearby bottle, gaunt, desperate, a woman brought to her knees. She braced herself for the expected scoff, the cruel joke, the turning away. But then, Silas did something that silenced the room completely, leaving every man there staring, mouths slightly agape. He didn't push the plate towards her. He didn't offer a coin. Instead, his gaze remained locked on hers, that same impenetrable stillness in his eyes, and he slowly, deliberately, cut another piece of steak. He lifted his fork, held it out to her, the meat impaled upon it, a single generous piece. He didn't offer the plate. He offered the bite directly, requiring her to step closer, to accept this direct, public act of sustenance. It was an offering devoid of sentimentality, yet in its raw simplicity, it carried an unexpected weight. It was not charity dispensed from a distance, but a direct acknowledgement of her immediate, fundamental need, forcing a moment of shared, awkward humanity under the harsh judgment of the onlookers. The ranch hands shifted, uncomfortable, unable to understand this quiet, profound gesture from a man known for his reticence and solitary nature. Alara hesitated for just a fraction of a second, understanding the silent challenge it posed to the onlookers. Then, propelled by a need that transcended pride, she stepped forward and, under the unblinking gaze of Silas and the stunned silence of the room, she took the meat from his fork. She chewed slowly, the taste of seasoned beef an explosion of flavor on her deprived palate, the simple act feeling impossibly significant. He watched her, his expression unreadable. When she had swallowed, he picked up his own fork again and resumed eating, as if nothing out of the ordinary had occurred. The other men slowly returned to their conversations, but the earlier callousness was gone, replaced by a palpable unease. When Silas finished his meal, he stood up, a towering figure. He didn't speak to Alara. He simply nodded once, a curt, almost imperceptible movement of his head, and walked out of the saloon into the blinding light of the afternoon. Alara stood rooted to the spot, the warmth of the meat a small, flickering ember in the vast emptiness within her, the silence around her heavier than the earlier jeers. She didn't understand the man or his gesture, but for the first time in days, The crushing weight of despair had lifted, replaced by a fragile, bewildering sense of having been seen. The dust swirled outside as Silas mounted his horse. He glanced back only once, towards the saloon door where she still stood. He saw not just her hunger, but the fierce, hidden spark in her eyes, the dignity that hardship had not extinguished. He spurred his horse, riding towards his isolated ranch nestled against the unforgiving hills. Alara watched him go, a silhouette against the horizon, a brief, inexplicable kindness in a world that had shown her only cruelty. She didn't know what to do next. The saloon was no place for her. The town offered nothing. The vast, empty land beckoned, and the hunger returned, though muted by the single bite. She drifted out of the saloon, the men's eyes following her, and found herself standing on the dusty street, the sun relentless. Hours passed. The shadows lengthened. Just as the sky began to bruise with twilight hues, a lone rider approached from the direction Silas had taken. It was one of his ranch hands, a younger man with a guarded expression. He stopped his horse before her. "Silas sent me," he mumbled, avoiding her eyes. "Says you can sleep in the old bunkhouse tonight. If you want," he gestured vaguely towards the edge of the small settlement, where a dilapidated structure sagged under the weight of neglect. It wasn't an offer of comfort, but a reprieve from the open ground and the chill of the coming night. It was another small, unexpected act from the stoic rancher. Alara nodded, unable to find her voice. The hand didn't wait for a reply, turning his horse and riding away. She made her way to the bunkhouse. It was rough, drafty, filled with the stale scent of disuse and rodent droppings. But it had 4 walls and a roof. As night fully descended, bringing with it a sharp drop in temperature, Alara huddled in a corner, shivering, the earlier moment in the saloon replaying in her mind. Why had he done it? Why hadn't he just given her the plate and been done with it? The directness of his offer felt significant, a recognition that she was not merely a beggar, but a person, reduced by circumstance but not erased. She thought of the stillness in his eyes, the lack of judgment. In this harsh world, judgment was freely given, like the wind and the dust. Its absence was a form of shelter in itself. Sleep came fitfully, punctuated by the sounds of the wind howling around the flimsy walls and the distant cries of nocturnal creatures. The next morning, she woke stiff and cold. Hunger returned with renewed vigor. Hesitantly, she walked towards the main ranch buildings visible in the distance. There was a cookhouse, smoke rising from its chimney. She saw ranch hands moving about, tending to horses and equipment. Silas was there, standing near the corrals watching the men work. He didn't look towards her as she approached. She stopped a respectful distance away, uncertainty warring with desperation. The smell of cooking bacon was almost unbearable. After a long silence, Silas turned his head slightly, speaking without looking directly at her. "Cook can give you some breakfast," he said, his voice low and gruff. "Then you can. Earn it, earn it." The words were neither kind nor cruel, simply a statement of fact in a world where nothing was free. A sense of relief washed over Alara, quickly followed by a surge of determination. Earning it was infinitely better than begging for it. It meant she was not just a burden, but someone with potential worth. She nodded. "Yes, sir." "Thank you, sir." She went to the cookhouse. The cook, a burly, red-faced man, grudgingly gave her a plate of beans and bacon. She ate slowly, savoring every bite, feeling strength seep back into her limbs. Her tasks were simple at first: washing dishes, sweeping out the cookhouse, mending torn clothes for the ranch hands. The work was hard and monotonous, but it was work. It gave her purpose. The ranch hands were wary, some openly hostile, others merely indifferent. She kept to herself, observing, learning the rhythms of the ranch, the language of the land and the animals. Silas remained a distant figure. He oversaw everything, missed nothing, but rarely spoke to her. Yet, his presence was a quiet assurance. He never subjected her to the leering looks or rough jokes the men sometimes directed her way. His stoic silence felt like a shield. Slowly, Tentatively, the frozen core of fear and despair within Alara began to thaw. She found a strange solace in the physical labor, in the predictability of the days. The vast, empty landscape that had once seemed a terrifying symbol of her own isolation now began to feel expansive, full of a raw, untamed beauty. She watched Silas sometimes, the way he moved with quiet authority, the way his eyes scanned the horizon. He was a part of this land, as unyielding and resilient as the ancient rocks that dotted the hills. She wondered about his story, about the stillness in his eyes, but she did not ask. Questions were not encouraged here. As weeks turned into months, Alara's strength grew. Her movements became more confident. She learned to care for the chickens, mend fences, even help with the horses, tasks she never imagined herself capable of. The initial suspicion from the ranch hands gradually faded, replaced by a grudging acceptance. She was quiet, hardworking, asked for nothing beyond what was offered, and did her share. Silas continued to watch, a silent observer of her quiet transformation. One evening, a fierce storm rolled in, sudden and violent. The wind howled, rain lashed down, and thunder rattled the small cookhouse where Alara was finishing cleaning. There was a sudden, desperate neighing from the corrals. Lightning had spooked the horses, and the gate had been damaged, several prime breeding mares bolting into the open range in the chaos. Silas and the men rushed out into the maelstrom. Alara knew nothing about wrangling horses, but she also knew the value of the mares to the ranch, to Silas. Without a second thought, she grabbed a lantern and ran out into the storm. She saw Silas silhouetted against a flash of lightning, struggling to contain the remaining horses. He was alone, most of the hands already riding out into the darkness after the escapees. One of the wild mares, driven by fear, charged towards the broken gate, directly into Silas's path. Silas saw the mare coming, eyes wide with terror, a force of nature matching the storm around them. He planted his feet, raising an arm, attempting to turn her, but the ground was slick with mud, and he stumbled. A sharp pain shot up his leg as the mare's shoulder slammed into him, sending him sprawling. He cried out, a rare sound of pain and surprise. Alara saw it happen. Time seemed to slow. The mare thundered past, disappearing into the rain and darkness. Silas lay in the mud, clutching his leg. The remaining horses, still panicked, milled nervously. This was the moment the external threat crystallized. Not just the storm, but the vulnerability it exposed, the reliance on strength she now saw falter. Without hesitation, Alara ran towards him, the lantern swinging wildly, casting erratic pools of light. She reached his side, kneeling in the mud. "Silas, are you hurt?" His face was pale, grimy with mud and rain. He grit his teeth against the pain. "Leg. Snapped." I think the words were forced out between gasps. The situation was dire. He couldn't move, the horses were still agitated, and the hands were gone. Alara looked from Silas to the milling horses, her heart pounding. Fear was a cold knot in her stomach, but the instinct to act, honed by months of silent observation and a rekindled will to survive, was stronger. "The horses," she said, her voice surprisingly steady despite the storm. "We need to calm them. Can you tell me what to do?" Silas looked at her, truly looked at her in that moment of shared crisis. He saw not the starved, desperate woman from the saloon, but someone resolute, capable, her eyes reflecting the same determined spark he had glimpsed that first day, now burning brighter. He swallowed, pain etched on his face. "Use the tone," he instructed, his voice raspy. Low, steady, like the wind dying down. Gentle movements led them towards the far corner, the one sheltered by the rock face. Alara nodded, absorbing his instructions. She handed him the lantern, positioning it so he could see, though it offered little solace against the elements. Then, drawing on a quiet strength she hadn't known she possessed, she rose and approached the restless horses. She spoke to them in a low, soothing tone, mimicking the sound of the wind easing, as Silas had described. She moved slowly, deliberately, her body language communicating calm rather than fear. It was terrifying, being so close to their powerful frames, their skittering hooves. But she focused on their eyes, on the need to convey safety. Slowly, miraculously, they responded. One by one, their panic seemed to ebb. She gently coaxed them, leading them away from the broken gate towards the sheltered corner. It took time, each step uncertain in the driving rain. But she persisted, Silas's pain-filled gaze a steady, albeit distant, anchor. Finally, she managed to gather them, her voice a continuous, soothing murmur. She found a length of rope and jury-rigged a temporary barrier across the gate opening, enough to deter them from further flight. Exhausted, soaked to the bone, trembling from cold and adrenaline, she returned to Silas's side. He was shivering, his face a mask of pain. "You did good," he said, the words a rare, earned compliment. Damn good. Getting him back to the main house was another ordeal, a slow, painful process of half-dragging, half-carrying him with his instructions. By the time they reached shelter, the first of the ranch hands were returning, having given up on finding the Mares in the dark. They stared at Alara, mud-caked and resolute, supporting their injured boss. The sight left them speechless in a way the saloon incident had only hinted at. Alara had faced the storm, faced the wild horses, and faced down her own fear. She had not just survived. She had acted, protected, saved. Her transformation was complete, forged in the crucible of hardship and necessity. In the days that followed, with Silas incapacitated, Alara stepped into a role she had never imagined. She organized the cookhouse, tended to Silas's injury with quiet efficiency, and even oversaw the men's chores, her voice now carrying a quiet authority born of respect earned in the storm. The ranch hands, witnessing her capability, her resilience, no longer saw the beggar woman, but a vital part of the ranch. Silas watched her, a new depth of understanding in his storm-cloud eyes. The stillness was still there, but now it held not just the vastness of the land, but a quiet acknowledgement of the strength he had seen bloom from desperation. He had offered a bite of food, a night's shelter, the chance to earn her keep. In return, she had shown him the enduring power of the human spirit, the resilience that could flourish even in the harshest soil. The future was still uncertain, the land still unforgiving, but Alara was no longer adrift. She had found her place, not through pity or charity, but through her own unwavering strength, her quiet dignity, and the shared crucible of survival with a man who had seen her not as a beggar, but as a human being worthy of being seen.